The mother-in-law's perfect revenge. Have you ever been pushed so far that you decided to take the ultimate revenge? What would you do if your own family treated you like you were invisible in your own home? What you're about to hear will shock you. Are you ready? Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. My name is Margaret Thompson. I'm 64 years old, and I'm about to tell you the most shocking story of my life. How I got the perfect revenge on my daughter-in-law, who tried to erase me from my own existence. Trust me, what happened next will leave you speechless. After my husband Charles died from a stroke 3 years ago, my world completely collapsed. We had been married for 38 years, and suddenly I was alone in our beautiful colonial house in suburban Minneapolis. The silence was deafening. My son Michael was my only comfort during those dark months of grief. When Michael told me he was getting serious with his girlfriend Sarah, I was genuinely happy for him. Sarah seemed sweet at first. A 29-year-old marketing manager with blonde hair and a bright smile. She would compliment my cooking and ask about my gardening. I thought I had found not just a daughter-in-law, but a friend. But looking back now, I realized Sarah was studying me like a predator studies its prey. When they got engaged, Sarah suggested they move in with me temporarily to save money for their future house. I eagerly agreed. The house felt so empty without Charles, and having young voices fill the rooms again seemed like a blessing. I cleaned out the master bedroom upstairs and moved myself to the smaller guest room on the first floor, telling them my niece would appreciate fewer stairs. The first few months were wonderful. Sarah would cook dinner with me, and we'd watch movies together on weekends. Michael seemed happier than I'd seen him since his father's death. I felt like I was part of a real family again. But then something changed. It started so subtly that I almost didn't notice. My favorite coffee mug disappeared from the kitchen cabinet. When I asked about it, Sarah said she thought it was cracked and threw it away for safety. My reading chair in the living room was suddenly moved to face the wall instead of the window where I loved to watch the birds. Sarah explained they needed more space for their new entertainment center. The photo of Charles and me from our 35th anniversary vanished from the mantel. Sarah claimed she was dusting and must have misplaced it, but somehow it never reappeared. Instead, engagement photos of her and Michael took its place. Then came the rules. Sarah started leaving little notes around the house. Please keep kitchen counters clear after 8 p.m. TV volume should stay below 15 after 9 p.m. Please check with us before having guests over. These weren't discussions. They were mandates in my own home. What I didn't realize at the time was that Sarah had started keeping a detailed journal of my daily activities. I discovered this months later when I found it hidden in her dresser drawer. Page after page documented my routines. Margaret watches TV from 7 to 9 p.m. in living room. Need to claim this space. She uses kitchen from 6 to 8 a.m. for breakfast. Too much overlap with our schedule. Still keeps Charles's cologne in master bathroom. Need to remove gradually. She had been studying me like a military strategist planning a conquest, noting every habit, every emotional attachment, every vulnerability she could exploit. The psychological manipulation escalated when Sarah began inviting her friends over for what she called girls' nights. These weren't casual get-togethers. They were strategic meetings designed to make me feel unwelcome. In my own home, her friends would spread out across the living room, speaking loudly about topics I couldn't relate to, laughing at inside jokes, and completely ignoring my existence when I walked through. One particularly cruel evening, I overheard Sarah's friend Jessica say, "God, it must be so awkward living with your boyfriend's mom. How do you deal with having no privacy?" Sarah's response cut through me like a knife. "Oh, she's hardly ever around anyway. She spends most of her time moping in her room. It's actually kind of pathetic." They all laughed while I stood frozen in the kitchen, feeling like an intruder in the home Charles and I had built together over for decades. I tried to talk to Michael about it, but he was completely under her spell. Whenever I brought up concerns, he'd say, "Mom, Sarah's just trying to help organize things. She's great at managing households." I started to feel like I was going crazy. The manipulation became more sophisticated when Sarah started involving Michael's friends in her campaign. She would host dinner parties and seat me at the far end of the table, then dominate conversations with stories that painted me as the overbearing mother-in-law who couldn't let go. "Poor Michael," she would say with fake sympathy. "He feels so guilty about his mom being lonely. But she really needs to build her own life, you know?" Michael's friends began treating me differently after these gatherings. They would speak to me in those patronizing tones people use with elderly relatives in nursing homes, asking about my activities and whether I was keeping busy. I realized Sarah had successfully rebranded me from family matriarch to burdensome dependent. The real wake-up call came during Thanksgiving. I had spent 3 days preparing our traditional family feast, the same recipes I'd used for decades. Charles's favorite stuffing, my grandmother's sweet potato casserole, the works. I was so excited to share these family traditions with Sarah. But when I went to set the table with our good china, the set Charles and I had received as a wedding gift, Sarah stopped me. "Oh, Margaret, I already set everything up with my dishes. They match the fall decorations so much better." My family's china was relegated to the cabinet while her generic white plates took center stage. During dinner, Sarah dominated the conversation, telling stories about her childhood Thanksgivings while I sat silently. When I tried to share the history behind each dish, she'd quickly change the subject. Michael didn't even notice. I felt like a stranger at my own table. But that was just the beginning of my nightmare. The psychological warfare intensified after the holidays. Sarah began what I can only describe as gaslighting with documentation. She would move my things and then create elaborate explanations when I noticed. "Margaret, you moved your glasses to the kitchen counter yesterday. Remember? You said the bedroom was too dark for reading." When I insisted I hadn't, she would look at Michael with a concerned expression and whisper, "I'm worried about her memory." She started a campaign to isolate me from my few remaining friends. When my neighbor Betty called to invite me for coffee, Sarah would intercept the call and explain that I was having a difficult day or not feeling social lately. When my sister Joan visited, Sarah would monopolize the conversation, discussing my adjustment issues as if I weren't sitting right there. The most devastating blow came when Sarah convinced Michael that I needed professional help dealing with my grief. She had researched local therapists and presented him with brochures, explaining that my resistance to change and inability to adapt were signs of complicated grief disorder. Michael, who trusted her completely, agreed to pay for sessions with Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a grief counselor Sarah had specifically chosen. What I discovered later was that Sarah had spoken with Dr. Hoffman before my first appointment, painting a picture of me as a delusional widow who was living in the past and resisting reality. The doctor spent our sessions trying to convince me that holding onto Charles's memory was unhealthy, and that I needed to let go of my old life to embrace a new identity. Over the next few months, Sarah's behavior became increasingly bold. She started referring to the house as our place when talking to friends. She rearranged my furniture without asking. She threw away my gardening magazines, claiming they were cluttering up the coffee table. The most heartbreaking moment came when I found boxes of my belongings in the basement. Photo albums from Michael's childhood, my collection of vintage books, even Charles's favorite sweater that still smelled like his cologne, all packed away like unwanted junk. When I confronted Sarah about it, she put on this sickeningly sweet voice and said, "Oh, Margaret, I was just trying to help you declutter. These old things were taking up so much space. Don't you want a more minimalist lifestyle?" But then I discovered something that revealed the true scope of her manipulation. Hidden in her desk drawer was a folder labeled Estate Planning Research. Inside were printouts about inheritance laws, property transfer procedures, and senior living facilities. She had screenshots of real estate websites showing the estimated value of my house, $485,000. There were notes in her handwriting. Average senior facility costs $3,200. Month equals $38,400. Year. House sale proceeds would cover 12 plus years of care. Sarah wasn't just trying to make me leave. She was planning to profit from it. She had calculated exactly how much money my departure would mean for her and Michael. The final piece of evidence was a text message thread with her sister that I accidentally saw when she left her phone on the kitchen counter. "Phase 3 is working perfectly," she had written. "The old bat is so confused and isolated now, she's starting to suggest senior living herself. Michael feels guilty, but agrees she'd be happier with people her own age. Another month and we'll have the house to ourselves." Her sister replied, "You're evil, but brilliant. How much is the place worth again?" "Almost $500,000. Plus no rent for Michael and me equals we can save $2,000 a month. By next Christmas, we'll be able to buy our own place with the savings." I realized then that Sarah wasn't just reorganizing, she was systematically erasing me from my own home. Every trace of my 40-year life in that house was being eliminated, piece by piece. The final straw came on a Tuesday evening in March. I was in the kitchen making tea when I overheard Sarah on the phone with her mother. She was laughing about something, and then I heard words that made my blood run cold. "Oh, it's going exactly as planned. Mom, she's so beaten down now, she barely fights back anymore. I give it another month before she suggests moving to a senior community herself. Then the house will be completely ours, and we won't have to deal with her sad widow act anymore." My hands started shaking so violently I nearly dropped my teacup. This woman had been playing a long game, systematically breaking down my spirit and confidence until I would voluntarily remove myself from my own home. And it was working. But what Sarah didn't know was that this sad widow had a few tricks up her sleeve. That night, I did something I should have done months earlier. I called Charles's old business partner, David Chen, who had always been like a brother to us. When I explained what was happening, his response was immediate. "Margaret, this is elder abuse. We're going to stop this right now." David connected me with his daughter Amy, who was a family law attorney specializing in elder rights. Amy came to the house the next day while Sarah and Michael were at work. After hearing my story and seeing Sarah's hidden documents, her face was grim. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, "what you're describing is financial elder abuse and psychological manipulation. This woman is systematically isolating you and planning to profit from your displacement. We need to act immediately." The next morning, I called my attorney, James Henderson, who had handled Charles's estate. I explained the situation and his response was immediate. "Margaret, we need to act fast and quietly. Do you trust me?" I told him I did. Within 48 hours, James had everything in motion. I signed documents that would change everything, but I kept my mouth shut and continued playing the role of the defeated old woman that Sarah expected. For the next 2 weeks, I watched Sarah continue her psychological warfare. She brought her friends over without telling me, letting them treat my home like their personal hangout spot. She started leaving real estate brochures for senior living communities on my nightstand, not even trying to be subtle anymore. Michael remained completely oblivious. When I tried once more to talk to him about Sarah's behavior, he actually said, "Mom, maybe Sarah's right. Maybe it would be good for you to be around people your own age." Those words broke something inside me. My own son was choosing this manipulative woman over his mother who had sacrificed everything for him. But I smiled and nodded, letting them both believe they had one. The day I put my plan into action was a Saturday. Sarah was out with her friends, probably celebrating her upcoming victory. Michael was at work. I had the house to myself, which was perfect for what needed to happen. I started by removing every single item that belonged to Sarah from the house. Her clothes, her kitchen gadgets, her decorative items, her books. Everything went into boxes and got loaded into a rented truck. I was methodical and thorough, but the real surprise was waiting in the mailbox. Remember those documents I had signed with my attorney? Sarah and Michael were about to discover that the house was no longer mine to control. I had transferred ownership to a family trust with very specific conditions. The new ownership documents stated that the house could only be occupied by Margaret Thompson and her direct descendants. Any non-family members living in the property had 72 hours to vacate or face legal action for trespassing. Sarah was no longer a welcomed guest. She was a legal intruder. When they returned that evening to find all of Sarah's belongings gone and the legal papers waiting on the kitchen table, I was sitting calmly in my restored living room, sipping tea from my favorite mug that I had secretly retrieved from the trash months earlier. Sarah's face went white as she read the documents. "This can't be legal," she screamed. "You can't just kick me out." But I could, and I did. Michael was furious at first. demanding explanations and accusing me of being vindictive. But when I played him the recording I had made of Sarah's phone conversation with her mother, yes, I had recorded it. His anger quickly turned to shock and then to shame. She was using me to get the house, he whispered, staring at Sarah like he was seeing her for the first time. Sarah tried to deny everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. She had been caught in her own web of manipulation. The next 72 hours were chaos. Sarah alternated between rage, tears, and desperate attempts to manipulate Michael into fighting the legal action. But my attorney had constructed the trust perfectly. Every move had been legal and binding. On Monday morning, a sheriff's deputy arrived to ensure Sarah's departure. She left with nothing but her clothes and her car, screaming threats about lawsuits that we all knew would go nowhere. Michael moved out too, choosing to follow Sarah to her apartment. He barely spoke to me for 3 months. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. 6 months later, Michael appeared at my door looking completely different. He had lost weight. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he looked like he had aged 5 years. "Mom," he said quietly, "Sarah left me. She found some guy with a bigger house and more money. She took half our savings and disappeared. I think she was planning this all along. I wanted to say I told you so, but looking at my broken son, I just opened the door wider and said, 'Come home.'" We spent that evening talking for hours. Michael apologized repeatedly, admitting he had been blind to Sarah's manipulation. He had lost his girlfriend, his savings, and nearly lost his mother because he chose to believe a stranger over the woman who had raised him. "How can you ever forgive me?" he asked. I looked at my son, my child who had been manipulated by a master manipulator, and realized that my revenge was complete not because I had destroyed Sarah, but because I had saved my family from her. Today, Michael lives in the house again, but our relationship is different. He treats me with the respect I should have had all along. He's dating a wonderful teacher named Lisa who actually asks for my recipes and wants to hear stories about Charles. And Sarah? I heard through mutual friends that she's currently engaged to her 4th victim. I mean, fiancé, in 2 years. Some people never change. The house is peaceful again. My photos are back on the mantle. My favorite mug is in its proper place. And I sleep in my own master bedroom where I belong. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemy. It's about reclaiming what was always rightfully yours and protecting the people you love from predators who disguise themselves as family. So I have to ask you, if someone was systematically trying to erase you from your own life, how far would you go to stop them? And was what I did justice? Or did I go too far? Let me know in the comments below, because I'd love to hear what you would have done in my situation.